Under a burning sky. The child appeared like a ghost through the heat shimmer, barefoot, sun-scorched, clutching a bundle that whimpered with the voice of dying hope. 10 years old, maybe less, eyes too old for her frame. She knocked on Ethan Cole's door, not begging for mercy, but asking for work. Behind her, the Wyoming dust road stretched empty for miles, a ribbon of abandonment beneath a merciless sun. In her arms, the baby had stopped crying, a silence more terrifying than screams. Ethan had buried kindness with his wife 3 years prior. But when that child looked up at him, something cracked in the wall he'd built around his heart. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Lena's story travels. Hit that like button and stay with me until the end, because what happens next will change everything. The sun hammered down on the Wyoming territory like the flat of a blacksmith's anvil, turning the air thick enough to chew. July had settled into the kind of heat that made men mean and animals listless, the kind that baked thought right out of a person's skull. Ethan Cole stood in the shadowed doorway of his ranch house, one hand gripping the frame, watching dust devils dance across the parcel of land he'd stopped caring about somewhere around the second winter after Sarah died. 3 years. 3 years of silence broken only by cattle lowing and his own boots on creaking floorboards. He was about to turn back inside when he saw her. At first he thought the heat was playing tricks, a wavering figure emerging from the shimmer where road met sky. But the image solidified as it drew closer. A child, rail-thin, walking with the careful determination of someone who'd learned that stopping meant dying. Her dress hung in tatters, once white fabric gone the color of dust and desperation. No shoes, hair matted against her skull in dark, sweat-stuck tangles. And in her arms, wrapped in what might have once been a shawl, something small moved weakly. Ethan's throat tightened. His first instinct was to retreat, to close the door, to protect himself from whatever tragedy was walking up his road. He'd had enough tragedy. He'd buried it 6 feet deep and built a life of careful numbness on top of it. But the child kept coming. When she reached the bottom of his porch steps, she stopped. Didn't climb, didn't presume, just stood there, swaying slightly, the bundle in her arms letting out a sound like a kitten drowning. "Mister." Her voice cracked on the word, dry as the land around them. "I can work." Ethan stared at her. Of all the things he'd expected, begging, pleading, tears, that hadn't been it. "You're a child," he said, and his own voice sounded strange to him, rusty from disuse. "I'm 10. She lifted her chin, and he saw the defiance there, fragile as glass but unbroken. "I can cook, clean, mend, garden, whatever you need." "Where are your folks?" Something shuddered behind her eyes. "Gone." The bundle whimpered again, weaker than before. Ethan's gaze dropped to it, and the child, he supposed he should ask her name, adjusted her grip with the practiced care of someone who'd been holding that weight for a long time. "That a baby?" "My sister, Mara. She's 5 months." The girl's voice wavered now, the first crack in her composure. "She needs water, please. I can work for it. I can—" "How long you been walking?" 3 days. Maybe 4. Ethan felt something cold move through him despite the heat. 3 days in this sun. No water, a baby. "Why didn't you stop at the Hendersons' place? Or the Millers'? Both closer than here." The girl's jaw tightened. "Doors don't open for people like us." "People like you." "Hungry people. Desperate people." She met his eyes, and there was no accusation there, just statement of fact. People nobody wants to see. Ethan looked at her. Really looked. Blistered feet leaving small smears of blood on his bottom step, arms trembling with exhaustion but locked tight around the baby, eyes that had seen too much and expected nothing. He should send her away. Send her to town, to the church, to someone else. This wasn't his problem. He'd paid his dues to suffering. He'd buried a wife who'd made this house warm, who'd filled it with laughter and the smell of bread and plans for children they'd never have. He'd earned his right to solitude. The baby made a sound like rattling paper. "Christ," Ethan muttered, and pushed open the screen door. "Get inside, both of you." The girl's eyes widened, the first flicker of something other than grim determination crossing her face. "I can work," she repeated, as if afraid he'd change his mind. "I promise. I won't be trouble. I just need—" "I said get inside." He stepped back, clearing the doorway. "Before that baby stops breathing altogether." She moved then, climbing the steps with care, favoring her left foot. As she passed him into the dimness of the house, he caught the smell of her, sweat and dust and something acrid, like fear baked into skin. The interior of the ranch house was sparse, clean in the way of places where no one lives so much as exists. Kitchen to the left, sitting room to the right, stairs leading up to bedrooms Ethan no longer entered. Everything exactly as it had been the day Sarah stopped breathing, as if preserving it might somehow bring her back. The girl stood in the middle of the front room, still holding the baby, looking around with the careful assessment of someone cataloging exits. "Set her down on the sofa," Ethan said, moving toward the kitchen. "Gentle." The girl obeyed, lowering the bundle onto the worn leather with a tenderness that made Ethan's chest ache. As the shawl fell away, he saw the baby properly, too small, too still, lips cracked and skin papery. The child's eyes were half closed, unfocused. Dehydration, advanced. Ethan had seen it before, in cattle, in horses, in men who'd gambled wrong on how far they could push across dry country. He grabbed the ceramic pitcher from the counter, thank God he'd drawn water that morning, and poured a cup. Brought it back to the girl, who'd knelt beside the sofa, one hand on her sister's chest, as if checking for breath. "You first," he said. She shook her head. "Mara needs—" "You can't help her if you pass out." He pushed the cup toward her. "Drink, slow. Not too much at once or you'll just bring it back up." The girl took the cup with shaking hands, raised it to her lips. The first swallow made her gasp, and tears sprang to her eyes, whether from relief or pain, Ethan couldn't tell. She drank half, then stopped herself with visible effort and set it down. "The baby," she whispered. Ethan had rags in the kitchen, clean ones Sarah had hemmed years ago and he'd never found use for. He wet one, brought it back, showed the girl how to let water drip onto the baby's lips, into her mouth, how to watch for swallowing, for response. For 10 minutes they worked in silence, the girl following his instructions with fierce concentration. Drip, wait, drip, wait. The baby's tongue moved, her eyes fluttered. A small sound emerged from her throat. Not quite a cry, but not silence. "Good," Ethan said. "That's good." The girl's shoulders sagged, and for the first time since she'd appeared on his road, she looked her age. A child, exhausted and terrified and trying not to show it. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. "Lena. Lena Hale." "I'm Ethan Cole." He gestured around. "This is my place. It was my place and my wife's, but she passed 3 years back." "I'm sorry." The words were automatic but not empty. "Yeah, me too." He stood, knees cracking. "You said you walked 3 days. From where?" Lena's expression closed again, that shuttered look returning. "Aunt Margaret's house, near Laramie. That's 40 miles. "Yes, sir." "And she just let you leave? With a baby?" Lena's laugh was bitter, too old for her throat. "She didn't let us do anything. She put us out." Ethan felt heat rise in him that had nothing to do with the weather. "Put you out. A 10-year-old and an infant. Said she couldn't afford to feed us anymore. Said our mama should have thought about that before she ran off with some cowboy and left us behind." Lena's voice was flat, reciting facts. "Said we were a burden she never asked for. Your mama, dead. She died having Mara. The cowboy left before the baby came." Lena looked down at her sister, whose eyes had opened fully now, tracking movement. "Aunt Margaret took us because the county said she had to. But after 6 months, she said she was done. Gave me a canteen and a loaf of bread and told me there was a mission in Douglas that takes orphans. Said to walk north and keep walking." Oh, Ethan's hands curled into fists. "Douglas is 60 miles from Laramie. I know. I got turned around." Lena's voice cracked again. "I thought I was going north, but the stars, I'm not good with stars. And then the water ran out and the bread got moldy, and I just kept walking because stopping meant—" She broke off, pressing her lips together hard. Ethan crouched down beside her, bringing himself to her eye level. "You're here now. You're safe. Both of you." Lena studied him with those too old eyes. For how long? The question landed like a punch. Because what was he offering? A cup of water? A cool room? Then what? Send them back out into the heat? Send them to people like the Hendersons and Millers who'd closed their doors? "Tonight," he heard himself say. "Tonight you stay here. We'll figure out tomorrow when it comes." Something in Lena's face shifted. Not quite hope, but maybe the memory of what hope looked like. I can work, she said again. Starting now. Starting now, you can rest. Ethan stood, his decision made in the same instinctive place that had made him open the door in the first place. There's a room upstairs, second door on the left. Bed's made up clean. You take the baby up there, get yourselves settled. I'll bring food. But that's the work I'm asking for right now. Rest. Can you do that? Lena nodded slowly, gathering Mara into her arms with care. She stood on trembling legs, made it to the base of the stairs, then stopped. Mr. Cole? Yeah? Thank you. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Ethan's throat close. He nodded, not trusting his voice, and watched as she climbed the stairs, each step careful, the baby held close against her heart. When she disappeared into the bedroom, Sarah's sewing room, the one with the good light, Ethan stood alone in his silent house and wondered what the hell he'd just done. The girls slept for 14 hours straight. Ethan checked on them twice, once at dusk, once at dawn. Both times Lena was curled around her sister on top of the quilt, not under it, as if even in sleep she didn't presume comfort. The baby slept too, her breathing steady now, color returning to her skin. On the second check, Ethan left a pitcher of water and some bread on the nightstand. By the time he came back from feeding the horses, both were gone, and the bed was made with hospital corners tight enough to bounce a coin. He found Lena in the kitchen. She'd swept the floor, washed the dishes he'd left in the basin, scrubbed the counter until the old wood grain showed through years of coffee stains. She stood at the stove now, Mara propped in a makeshift sling across her chest, stirring something in a pot. Ethan stopped in the doorway, completely wrong-footed. "Morning," Lena said without turning around. "I found oats and some dried apples. Made porridge. Hope that's all right." "You don't have to. I said I'd work." She glanced at him, and there was steel in her gaze. "I keep my word." Ethan moved into the kitchen, looked into the pot. The porridge was smooth, properly cooked, seasoned with cinnamon he'd forgotten he owned. The smell filled the room, warm and alive. "When's the last time you cooked?" he asked. "I cooked for Aunt Margaret every day. Breakfast, lunch, dinner." Lena adjusted Mara's sling. "She said if I was going to eat, I had to earn it. You were 9 years old." "So?" Ethan didn't have an answer for that. He grabbed 2 bowls from the cabinet, set them on the table. Lena served the porridge with the efficiency of long practice, then hesitated. "Should I eat in the other room?" she asked quietly. "Why would you do that?" "Aunt Margaret said children should be seen and not heard, especially at meals." "Well, I'm not your Aunt Margaret." Ethan pulled out a chair, sat down. "Sit." Lena obeyed, settling carefully into the chair across from him, Mara still strapped to her chest. The baby was awake now, eyes bright, making small cooing sounds. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The porridge was good, better than anything Ethan had made for himself in 3 years. He tried to remember the last time he tasted cinnamon, the last time food had been more than fuel. "This is real good," he said finally. Lena's shoulders relaxed a fraction. "Thank you." "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" "My mama, before she got sick, before Mara, she used to say cooking was love made visible." Lena's voice softened with memory. "She'd let me stand on a stool and stir, and she'd tell me stories about her mama, and her mama's mama, all the way back. Said recipes were family, passed down like names." "What happened to her? Your mama?" Lena's spoon stilled. "Mara came too early, too hard. Mama bled, and the midwife couldn't stop it. She held Mara once, said her name, and then she was gone." "I'm sorry." "Everyone's sorry, nobody helps." The words came out sharp. Then Lena seemed to catch herself. "I'm sorry, that was rude." "It was honest." Ethan set down his spoon. "And you're not wrong." They finished eating. Lena stood immediately gathering dishes, but Ethan stopped her with a raised hand. "Lena, sit back down." She froze, something like fear flashing across her face. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, I just want to talk to you." Slowly she sat. Mara fussed, and Lena rocked automatically, a motion so practiced it seemed unconscious. Ethan chose his words carefully. "You can't stay here." Lena's face went blank, carefully blank, the way it had been when she first appeared on his porch. "I understand. I'll get our things." Let me finish. He waited until she met his eyes. You can't stay here permanently without the law getting involved. The county, the church, people who'll ask questions. But you can stay here temporarily while we figure out what comes next. What comes next is we leave. Lena's voice was dull. We'll go to the mission in Douglas. Like Aunt Margaret said. Those missions... Ethan stopped himself. He'd heard stories about the territorial orphanages. Overcrowded. Understaffed. Children dying of fever and neglect. There might be better options. Like what? I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. He stood, carried his bowl to the basin. In the meantime, you're welcome here, both of you. Why? The question was quiet but direct. Why help us? Ethan turned, looked at this child who'd walked 40 miles through killing heat, who'd cooked breakfast in a stranger's kitchen, who'd been abandoned by blood and learned to expect nothing. Because someone should have helped you days ago, he said, and they didn't, and I can't fix that, but I can fix today. Lena's throat worked. She nodded once, sharp, before she could cry. Now, Ethan said, gentling his tone, if you're determined to work, I could use someone to help with the chickens. They've been producing poorly, and I think they're just bored. Maybe a different hand would improve their disposition. The corner of Lena's mouth twitched, almost a smile. I can do that. Good. But first we're going to do something about those feet. He dug through Sarah's old trunk, something he'd avoided for 3 years, and found wool socks, sturdy and whole. Found a pair of Sarah's work boots that, stuffed with rags, fit Lena well enough. Watching the girl lace them up, her fingers careful on leather that had once held his wife's feet, Ethan felt the strangest sensation. Not quite grief, not quite hope, something like possibility. 18. The days developed a rhythm. Lena rose before dawn, Mara strapped to her in the sling she'd fashioned from an old tablecloth. She'd feed the chickens, collect eggs, pull weeds from the kitchen garden that had gone wild since Sarah's death. She worked with the methodical focus of someone who believes stopping meant disappearing. Ethan tried to slow her down, tried to tell her she didn't need to earn her keep so desperately. But Lena would just look at him with those ancient eyes and find another task. Mending his shirts, reorganizing the pantry, scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing. Child works like the devil's on her heels, muttered Tom Brennan, the ranch hand who came twice a week to help with the cattle. He watched Lena hauling water from the well, Mara sleeping against her chest. That natural? No, Ethan said. It's not. But he didn't know how to stop it. Didn't know how to tell her she was safe when she'd learned that safety was a lie people told before they put you out. What he could do was make sure she ate, make sure she rested, even if she fought him on it, make sure Mara got proper milk. He'd brought in a wet nurse from town, Mrs. Chen, whose own baby had died at birth and who wept with gratitude for the chance to feed another child. Slowly, so slowly Ethan almost didn't notice, things changed. Mara grew plump and lively, giggling at dust motes and grabbing at Lena's fingers. Lena's feet healed. The constant tension in her shoulders eased, just slightly. She started speaking without being spoken to first, started asking questions about the ranch, about the animals, about the land. Why don't you have more cattle? She asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun bleed out over the horizon. Had a full herd once. Sarah and I, we were building something. Ethan rocked in his chair, the old wood creaking. After she died, I sold most of them off. Didn't see the point. The point of what? Of building, of planning for a future. He looked at her. Of any of it. Lena was quiet for a moment. Mara dozed in her arms, milk-drunk and peaceful. My mama used to say the future comes whether you plan for it or not, Lena said finally. Said you might as well plant seeds even if you're not sure you'll be there for harvest, because someone will be. And they'll be grateful. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Your mama sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. Lena's voice was soft. I wish Mara could have known her. You'll tell her, when she's older. You'll tell her all the stories, and it'll be like knowing her. You think so? I know so. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened, stars beginning to prick through the blue. Cicadas hummed in the grass. Somewhere distant, a coyote called. Mr. Cole? Lena's voice was small. Yeah? How long is temporary? Ethan's hands tightened on the chair arms. It was the question he'd been avoiding, the one that woke him at 3 a.m. and kept him staring at the ceiling. I don't know, he admitted, but I'm working on it. Working on what? On making temporary into something more permanent. He'd been to town twice in the past week, talking to the circuit judge, to the county clerk, to anyone who might know how a widowed rancher could become guardian to 2 orphaned girls. The law was murky, the process unclear, but Ethan was persistent in a way he hadn't been about anything since Sarah died. Lena looked at him, and in the dimness, her eyes shone. You'd do that? Really? If you'd want me to. Her voice caught. We don't have any money. We can't pay you back. I'm not asking for payment. Then why? It was the same question she'd asked before, but this time Ethan had an answer. Because this house has been dead for 3 years, he said quietly, and you brought it back to life. Because Mara laughs at the chickens and it's the best sound I've heard in longer than I can remember. Because you make coffee so strong it could wake a corpse and porridge that tastes like my grandmother's. Because he stopped, swallowed hard. Because I forgot what it felt like to have a reason to get up in the morning. And you gave that back to me. Lena was crying now, silently, tears tracking down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. I was so scared, she whispered. I thought we were going to die on that road. I thought nobody would ever... She broke off, shaking her head. I know. If you hadn't opened the door... But I did. Why? Everyone else... I don't know. Ethan looked out at his land, at the darkening sky, at the future he'd stopped believing in. Maybe I was supposed to. Maybe Sarah would have wanted me to. Maybe I was just in the right place at the right time. Does it matter? It matters to me. Then let's call it fate. He stood, his knees protesting. Come on, let's get inside. I'll teach you how to make Sarah's biscuit recipe. She always said it was too good to die with her. Lena stood too, cradling Mara close. Mr. Cole? Call me Ethan. Mr. Cole makes me feel old. Ethan. She tested the name, then smiled, a real smile, the first he'd seen from her. Thank you. You already said that. I'll probably say it 1,000 more times. Well, Ethan held open the screen door, felt the cool air from inside wash over them. I suppose I can live with that. They went inside together, into the house that smelled like coffee and cinnamon and slowly healing things. Mara babbled. Lena laughed. Ethan felt something in his chest uncurl for the first time in 3 years. Temporary, he thought. But maybe not forever. Maybe, just maybe, something more. The future came whether you planned for it or not. Someone wise had said that. Ethan was starting to believe it might be true. But 3 weeks after Lena arrived, the dust cloud appeared on the horizon. Ethan saw it from the north pasture where he was checking fence posts. His stomach dropped. He knew that dust, the kind kicked up by a wagon moving fast, driven by purpose. He rode back to the house at a gallop. Lena was in the garden, Mara sleeping in a basket at her feet, carefully transplanting tomato seedlings. She looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, registered his expression, and went pale. What's wrong? Company coming. Don't know who yet. He dismounted, led the horse to the rail. Get Mara. Go inside. But inside, Lena. Now. She grabbed the basket and ran, her new boots kicking up dust. Ethan watched her disappear into the house, then turned to face the approaching wagon. It rolled up to the gate 5 minutes later, a buckboard drawn by 2 horses lathered with sweat. The woman driving wore black bombazine despite the heat, her face sharp beneath a severe bonnet. A man sat beside her, thin and nervous, fingers drumming on his knee. Ethan knew who she was before she opened her mouth. Mr. Cole? The woman's voice was cold, clipped. I'm Margaret Hale. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Ethan moved down from the porch, positioned himself between the wagon and his front door. Ma'am, I've come for my nieces. Is that so? Margaret's eyes narrowed. Don't play games with me. I know they're here. I have it on good authority that a man fitting your description was seen in town, asking questions about orphans. I've been asking questions, all right, about how to protect 2 children from a woman who put them out in the summer heat with no water and a map to nowhere. Color flooded Margaret's cheeks. How dare you? I took those girls in when no one else would. fed them, clothed them, and when I could no longer afford to keep them, I gave them directions to a mission that would care for them. That's more than most would do. You sent a 10-year-old and an infant on a 60-mile walk through killing heat. That's not charity, that's murder with extra steps. I gave them provisions. A loaf of bread and a canteen. They'd been walking for 3 days when they got here. The baby was dying. The thin man beside Margaret shifted uncomfortably. Maggie, maybe we should— Quiet, Harold. Margaret turned her full attention back to Ethan. Those children are my blood. My responsibility. The law says I can file for guardianship on the grounds of abandonment. Ethan kept his voice level. Which I'm prepared to do. Margaret's laugh was sharp. You? A bachelor rancher with no family, no ties, against a blood relative? You'll never win. Maybe. Maybe not. Ethan crossed his arms. But I'll fight it. And while we're fighting it, those girls stay with me, where they're safe, where they're wanted. Something ugly crossed Margaret's face. They told you I put them out, did they? Spun you some sad story? Children lie, Mr. Cole. Children manipulate. Lena was a willful, disobedient girl who refused to listen, refused to behave. I did everything I could, and it was never enough. Sometimes a child needs to learn hard lessons. And sometimes, Ethan said quietly, an adult needs to learn what the word guardian actually means. Margaret's hand tightened on the wagon rail. I'm taking them. Today. Now. No, you're not. You can't stop me. Actually, I can. Ethan didn't move, but something in his stance shifted. This is my land. You're trespassing, and unless you've got the sheriff with you, which you don't, you've got no legal right to take anyone from my property. Harold spoke up, his voice reedy. Maggie, he's right. We should go through proper channels. Shut up, Harold. Margaret stared at Ethan, her jaw working. This isn't over. No, it's not. But it will be. In court, with a judge, where everyone can hear exactly how you treated 2 orphaned children. Margaret's face went rigid. For a moment, Ethan thought she might try to force her way past him, but then she yanked the reins, turning the wagon in a sharp circle. You'll regret this, she spat. Those girls are nothing but trouble. The older one's got the devil in her, and the baby. She'll break your heart or your bank, one or the other. You'll see. You'll see, and you'll wish you'd never opened your door. Already seen enough, Ethan said, and I don't regret a thing. Margaret snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward, wheels churning dust. Ethan watched until it disappeared over the rise, then turned and walked back to the house. He found Lena upstairs, pressed against the window, Mara clutched tight. Her face was bloodless. She's going to take us back, Lena whispered. She's going to— No. Ethan came to stand beside her. She's not. You heard her. She said, I heard a bitter woman making threats, but threats aren't the same as truth. He put a hand on Lena's shoulder, felt her trembling. I told you I was working on making temporary permanent. That means I'm going to fight for you, both of you, in court, if I have to. And I don't lose fights easy. Lena turned to look at him, and her eyes were huge. What if you lose anyway? Ethan had no answer that wouldn't be a lie, so he gave her the truth. Then we'll deal with it, together, but we're not going down without a fight. Lena swallowed hard, then nodded. But that night, Ethan woke to sounds from downstairs. He grabbed the lamp, made his way down, and found Lena in the kitchen. She dragged the wash basin into the middle of the floor and was scrubbing the baseboards with a brush, her hands red and raw. Mara slept in her basket on the table. Lena, what are you doing? She didn't look up. There's dirt in the corners. I missed it before. I'm fixing it. It's 2 a.m. I know, I'm sorry. I'll be quiet. Ethan crossed to her, gently took the brush from her grip. Lena, stop. I can't. Her voice broke. If the house isn't perfect, if I'm not useful, if she comes back and you think we're too much trouble? Hey. He crouched down, made her look at him. Listen to me. You are not too much trouble. You are not here because you're useful. You're here because you belong here. But what if— No, what ifs? Look at me. He waited until her breathing slowed. Margaret scared you today. That's natural. But you don't have to earn your place here by working yourself to death. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be yourself. That's enough. That's more than enough. Lena's face crumpled. I'm scared. I know. What if we have to go back? We'll make sure that doesn't happen. How? Ethan pulled her into a hug, the first time he'd done so, and felt her collapse against him, all the terror and exhaustion pouring out in silent sobs. I don't know yet, he admitted into her hair, but I promise you I'll figure it out. You're not alone anymore. You understand? You're not alone. Lena clung to him like a drowning person clings to driftwood. And Ethan held on. This child who'd walked through fire and somehow still believed in doors that might open. Outside, the Wyoming night was vast and dark. Inside, a lamp burned. And tomorrow, Ethan thought, tomorrow he'd go to town and find a lawyer. Tomorrow, they'd start fighting back. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and tobacco smoke. Ethan sat across from Samuel Pritchard, a man whose silver beard and wire-rimmed spectacles gave him the look of someone who'd seen every permutation of human foolishness and stopped being surprised by any of it. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Pritchard said, steepling his fingers. You want a petition for guardianship of 2 minor children, not relatives, not kin, against the objection of their blood aunt? That's right. Pritchard leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. Mr. Cole, I'll be frank with you. The law favors blood relatives. Always has. Likely always will. Unless you can prove the aunt is demonstrably unfit. She put them out, Ethan interrupted. A 10-year-old girl and a 5-month-old baby. Sent them walking 60 miles with 1 canteen of water and a loaf of bread. In July. The baby nearly died. Do you have witnesses to this? The children. Children whose testimony a judge might consider unreliable or coached. Pritchard pulled out a sheet of paper, dipped his pen. What about evidence of neglect, bruises, scars, medical records? Ethan thought of Lena's blistered feet, her too thin frame, the way she flinched at sudden movements. The girl's feet were torn to hell when she arrived. She was half-starved. The baby was dehydrated to the point of... Did a doctor examine them? No, I treated them myself. Pritchard's expression said everything. Then we have no medical documentation, no official record, just your word against hers. My word's good. I don't doubt it, but in court we need more than good intentions. The lawyer tapped his pen against the desk. The aunt will argue she was doing her best with limited resources, that she gave the children directions to a mission because she couldn't afford to keep them, that you, a stranger, manipulated frightened children into staying with you for... He paused delicately. Well, we both know what she'll imply. Heat flooded Ethan's face. That's a damn lie. I know that, you know that. But how does it look? Widowed rancher living alone takes in 2 young girls? Pritchard shook his head. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's what she'll use. Ethan's hands clenched on the chair arms. So what are you telling me? That I should just hand them back? I'm telling you this won't be easy. The aunt has blood right. You have good intentions and no legal standing. If we go to court without something concrete, something that proves beyond doubt that those children are better off with you, we'll lose. Then what do I need? Pritchard considered. Time, for one thing. The longer the children are with you, thriving and healthy, the stronger the case that you're providing adequate care. Character witnesses, people who can attest to your fitness as a guardian. And ideally, something that demonstrates the aunt's unfitness that goes beyond hearsay. How much time? 3 months minimum before we can even file. 6 would be better. Ethan stood abruptly, paced to the window. Main Street stretched below, dusty and ordinary. Somewhere out there, Margaret Hale was plotting. Somewhere out there, Lena was probably scrubbing something that didn't need scrubbing, convinced she had to earn every breath. What if she comes back before then? He asked. What if she shows up with the sheriff? Does she have grounds for that? She's their blood relative. But you haven't kidnapped them. They came to you of their own accord, and you've provided care. As long as you're not preventing her from seeing them, I sure as hell am preventing that, Pritchard sighed. Then we're in murky water. Legally, she has a stronger claim, but practically no sheriff's going to drag children away from a situation where they're clearly being cared for without a court order. Which means she'd have to file a petition, which takes time. Time we can use to build your case. Ethan turned from the window. So we wait. We prepare. And yes, we wait. Pritchard pulled out another sheet. In the meantime, I need you to document everything. What the children were like when they arrived. How they've improved. Any statements the girl makes about her treatment at the aunt's home. Witnesses who've seen them before and after. Build me a narrative that shows these children were neglected and that they're flourishing under your care. I can do that. Good. I'll start drafting the petition. But, Mr. Cole, Pritchard fixed him with a level stare. Be prepared for this to get ugly. The aunt will fight. The community will talk. Some folks won't understand why a single man wants to raise two girls. You'll face questions, judgment. Are you ready for that? Ethan thought of Lena standing on his porch, asking for work, of Mara's laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for 3 years, of the way his house smelled like coffee and cinnamon again, like life. Yeah, he said. I'm ready. He paid Pritchard's retainer, more money than he'd spent on anything since Sarah's funeral, and rode back to the ranch with the lawyer's words circling in his head like buzzards. Build a narrative. Document everything. Prepare for ugly. He could do that. He would do that. He had to. When he got home, he found Lena in the barn, mucking out stalls while Mara watched from a nest of blankets in an empty feed bin. The girl worked with methodical efficiency, her face set with concentration. Lena, she jumped, pitchfork clattering. I'm sorry. I know you said you'd do this tomorrow, but I had time, and I thought, it's fine. He held up a hand. But we need to talk. The color drained from her face. About what? About court. About making this official. He sat down on a hay bale and told her everything Pritchard had said. About the petition. About blood rights and legal standing and the need to document her story. Lena listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. So you want me to tell people what Aunt Margaret did, she said finally. Only if you're comfortable with it. What if they don't believe me? Then we'll find another way. Lena picked at a splinter on the pitchfork handle. She'll say I'm lying. She'll say I was difficult and disobedient and that she tried her best. Were you? Difficult, I mean? I talked back sometimes. When she'd say mean things about Mama or about Mara crying too much. Lena's voice was small. I'd tell her it wasn't Mara's fault she was hungry, that babies cry, and she'd get so angry, said I was disrespectful, said I had my mama's smart mouth and it would get me nowhere good. Standing up for your sister isn't disrespectful. It's brave. Didn't feel brave, felt scared. Lena looked up at him. What if I have to see her again? In court? You might. I don't want to. I know, but Lena... Ethan chose his words carefully. If we're going to fight this, I need you to be honest with me. About everything that happened at your aunt's house. About why she really put you out. Can you do that? Lena's throat worked. She glanced at Mara, who was gnawing contentedly on a wooden spoon. It wasn't just about money, she said quietly. Aunt Margaret, she had a gentleman caller, Mr. Billings from the Mercantile. He'd come for supper on Sundays, and she'd be all smiles and sweetness. But she told me to keep Mara quiet during his visits, said a crying baby would make him think she was too burdened, too old. How'd she expect you to keep a baby quiet? I'd take Mara outside, even when it was cold, even when it was hot. I'd walk with her until she fell asleep, and I'd stay out there until Mr. Billings left. Lena's hands twisted together. One time Mara got sick, a fever. She was crying, and I couldn't make her stop. Mr. Billings was there, and he looked annoyed, and Aunt Margaret, she told me to take Mara out to the barn. So I did. And I stayed there all night because I was afraid to come back in. Ethan's jaw tightened. What happened to the baby? The fever broke by morning, but Aunt Margaret was furious, said I'd embarrassed her, said Mr. Billings thought she couldn't control her own household. 2 days later, she told me to pack our things. Lena's voice cracked. She said she'd given me a chance, and I'd ruined it, said we were a curse on her life, and she was done. Did she give you money? Food? Anything besides that bread and water? No, just a piece of paper with the mission's name on it. And she said... Lena stopped, swallowed hard. She said if I came back, she'd have me arrested for trespassing. Ethan felt something cold and furious settle in his chest. That woman put you out because you interfered with her courting. I should have been quieter, should have tried harder. No. He stood, crossed to her, crouched down so they were eye level. Listen to me. You did nothing wrong. You protected your sister. You did what any decent person would do. Your aunt, she chose a man over 2 children who needed her. That's on her, not you. Tears spilled down Lena's cheeks. But if I'd just... No. None of this is your fault. You understand? None of it. Lena nodded, but Ethan could see she didn't believe him. Not really. The guilt had settled too deep. I need you to write this down, he said gently. Everything you just told me. Everything you remember about living with your aunt. Can you do that? I guess so. Good. And Lena, when we go to court, you might have to say these things out loud. In front of a judge, maybe in front of your aunt. Lena's face went pale, but she nodded. If it means we can stay here, I'll do it. You're sure? I'm sure. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. This is home now. I'll fight for it. Ethan pulled her into a quick hug, felt her arms come around him, small and fierce. We'll fight together, he said. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan threw himself into building the case. He rode into town and spoke to people who might serve as character witnesses. Tom Brennan, the ranch hand, agreed immediately. So did Mrs. Chen, the wet nurse, who'd seen Mara transform from a skeletal infant to a thriving baby. The pastor at the Methodist church was more cautious, but eventually agreed to write a letter attesting to Ethan's moral character. Doc Reinhardt, who'd treated Sarah in her final illness, was the most helpful. He examined both girls at Ethan's request and documented everything in his neat physician's hand. Lena's scarred feet, her malnourished state upon arrival, now improved. Mara's healthy weight gain and development. The doctor's report was clinical and damning. This child was within days of death when she came to you, Reinhardt said, handing over the written report. I'll testify to that in court if needed. Thank you. Don't thank me. I should have asked more questions when Margaret Hale came through town with those girls 6 months ago. Should have noticed they looked poorly. The doctor's mouth thinned. I let them slip through because I was busy, because I assumed blood family meant safety. I won't make that mistake again. Ethan also wrote to the mission in Douglas, requesting records of whether they'd ever received 2 girls matching Lena and Mara's description. The response came back 2 weeks later. No record of any Hale children. The mission director added a pointed note that sending a child on a 60-mile journey with inadequate provisions bordered on criminal negligence. Pritchard was pleased with the accumulating evidence but cautioned patience. We need more time, the lawyer said during their second meeting. The longer those girls thrive with you, the stronger our case. How much longer? Until the fall, at least. Maybe winter. We want to show sustained care, not just a few weeks of charity. Ethan hated the delay, but he understood the logic, so he settled into the rhythm of summer on the ranch, waiting for the axe to fall. It came on a Tuesday afternoon in late August. Ethan was in the south pasture, repairing fence posts, when he saw the rider approaching. Not a wagon this time. A single horse, moving fast. As the figure drew closer, he recognized the star pinned to the man's vest. Sheriff Tom Dawson. Ethan's gut clenched. He set down his hammer and walked to meet the lawman at the fence line. Tom. Ethan. Dawson dismounted, his weathered face apologetic. Wish this was a social call. But it's not. No. I've got a complaint filed by Margaret Hale. Says you're holding her nieces against their will, refusing to let her see them. That's a lie. She hasn't tried to see them. She threatened to take them, and I told her she couldn't. That's different. Dawson pulled off his hat, wiped sweat from his forehead. Legally speaking, she's got a claim. Blood relative and all. Legally speaking, I'm filing for guardianship on the grounds that she abandoned those children, left them to die in the heat. That's for a judge to decide. Exactly. So until a judge decides, those girls stay with me. The sheriff sighed, replaced his hat. Ethan, I know you mean well, and between you and me, I think Margaret Hale's got a cold heart, but I got a job to do. She's demanding I bring those children to her for a welfare check. No, it's not a request. Then make it an order. Get a court order saying I have to hand them over, and I will. Until then, they're staying put. Dawson's expression hardened. Don't make this difficult. I'm not making it difficult. The law is. You just said it yourself. Blood relatives have rights. Well, so do I. I'm their current guardian by circumstance, and until a court says otherwise, I'm within my rights to refuse. You're walking a thin line. I'm aware. They stared at each other across the fence, 2 men who'd known each other for years, now on opposite sides of an invisible line. I could arrest you for obstruction, Dawson said quietly. You could try. Ethan. Tom. Those girls were dying when they got here. Dying. The baby had stopped crying because she didn't have the strength left. Lena's feet were raw meat. They'd been walking for 3 days with no food and almost no water because their aunt threw them out like garbage. Ethan's voice was low and hard. Now you tell me, you really want to take them back to that? Dawson looked away, jaw working. What I want doesn't matter. It matters to me, and it'll matter to those girls. The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, I can't ignore the complaint, but I can tell Margaret I need a court order before I can remove children from a home where they're clearly being cared for. That'll buy you some time. How much? A few weeks, maybe a month if the circuit judge is delayed. Dawson met his eyes. Use it wisely. Get your ducks in a row. Because when this goes to court, she's going to fight dirty. I know. Good luck, Ethan. You're going to need it. The sheriff mounted his horse and rode away, dust rising behind him. Ethan stood at the fence line, watching until he disappeared, then turned and walked back toward the house. He found Lena on the porch, Mara in her lap. She'd seen the sheriff. Her face was white. Is he coming back? She whispered. Not today. Maybe not for a few weeks, but eventually, yes. To take us. To try. Ethan sat down beside her. But Lena, I want you to know something. No matter what happens, I'm not giving up. Not on you, not on Mara. We're in this together, all the way. Lena's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. What do we do now? We keep going. We keep building our case, and we trust that when the time comes, the truth will matter. What if it doesn't? Ethan had no answer for that, so instead he put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close, this child who'd become so much more than a stranger seeking shelter. Then we'll figure out what comes next, he said, together. They sat in silence as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. The chickens clucked in their coop. Ordinary sounds of an ordinary day. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. That night, after Lena and Mara were asleep, Ethan sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter to his son. Dear James, I know we haven't spoken in 3 years. I know you blame me for your mother's death, and maybe you're right to. I should have gotten the doctor sooner, should have seen the signs, should have done 100 things differently. But I'm writing now because I need your help. There are 2 children living with me. Sisters, orphaned and abandoned. I'm fighting to keep them, to give them a home. The law might not be on my side, but it's the right thing to do. Your mother would have wanted this. I know she would. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to come home and stand with me when this goes to court, to show the judge that this house can be a family again, that I'm not just a lonely old man with selfish motives. Please, James. If you ever loved your mother, do this for her memory. Your father, Ethan. He sealed the letter, addressed it to the last place he knew James was working, a mine outside of Denver, and left it on the table to mail in the morning. He had no idea if his son would come, but he had to try. The next few weeks passed in a strange, suspended state, like waiting for a storm everyone could see building on the horizon. Lena threw herself into work with renewed intensity, as if by being indispensable she could somehow make herself permanent. Ethan tried to slow her down, but she was relentless. I need to be useful, she said when he found her hauling water at dawn. I need to show I'm worth keeping. You're not a horse being evaluated for purchase. You're a child who deserves to be wanted just for existing. But the words didn't land. Lena had learned too well that love was transactional, earned rather than given. So Ethan tried a different approach. He started teaching her things. How to read the sky for weather. How to gentle a skittish horse. How to calculate the ranch's expenses and income. He showed her the account books, explained profit and loss, let her see the mechanics of running a working ranch. Why are you teaching me this? She asked one evening, frowning over a column of numbers. Because someday you'll need to know. And because, he hesitated, because I want you to understand that this place, this life, it's not just mine, it's ours. And I want you to feel like you belong to it as much as it belongs to you. Lena's throat worked. But what if the judge says, no what ifs, not tonight. Tonight, we're just going to work on your arithmetic and pretend the future isn't waiting. They worked in comfortable silence, the lamp casting warm light over the worn table. Mara slept in her basket nearby, making small, contented sounds. Outside, crickets sang their evening chorus. For a moment, it was possible to believe this could last. The letter from James arrived on a Thursday. Ethan's hand shook as he opened it, standing in the middle of the general store with people brushing past him. The handwriting was his son's, but harder somehow, more angular. "Father, I got your letter. I'm not coming. You say Mother would have wanted this, but you don't get to speak for her. You weren't there when she needed you, and now you want me to come running because you found a replacement family? I have a life in Denver, a job, people who depend on me. I can't just drop everything because you've decided to play savior to some orphans. Do what you want with those kids, but leave me out of it." James Ethan read the letter 3 times, each word landing like a blow. Then he folded it carefully, put it in his pocket, and walked out of the store. He made it halfway home before he had to stop the wagon, pull over to the side of the road, and let the grief wash through him. Not just for his son's refusal, but for everything it represented. The years of silence, the blame that had calcified into permanent distance, the family that had shattered and couldn't be put back together. Sarah would have known what to do. Sarah could have bridged the gap between them, soothed the hurt, found the words that made forgiveness possible. But Sarah was gone, and Ethan was alone with his mistakes and a court case he might not win. When he got home, Lena took one look at his face and asked, "What happened?" "Nothing, just tired." But she wasn't fooled. That night, after he thought she'd gone to bed, she came back downstairs and sat across from him at the table. "Was it bad news?" she asked quietly. "About the court?" "No, something else." He pulled out the letter, slid it across to her. "You can read it if you want." Lena read slowly, her lips moving slightly over the harder words. When she finished, she looked up at him with eyes too old for her age. "He's angry," she said. "Yeah." "At you?" "Yeah." "Because of his mother." Ethan nodded, unable to speak past the thickness in his throat. Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My mama used to say that grief makes people mean sometimes, that it's easier to be angry than sad, because anger feels like strength." Your mama was right. She also said that angry people sometimes come around, eventually, when they're ready. Lena reached across the table, put her small hand on his. "Maybe your son just needs more time." "Maybe. Or maybe some things break too bad to fix." "I don't believe that." "Why not?" "Because you fixed me." Her voice was simple, matter of fact. "I was broken when I got here, and you put me back together, so maybe your son can be fixed too. He just needs someone who won't give up on him." Ethan looked at this child who'd walked through hell and still believed in redemption and felt something in his chest crack open. "When'd you get so wise?" he asked roughly. "When I met you." She squeezed his hand. "We're going to be okay. All of us. I know it." Ethan wanted to believe her. He desperately wanted to believe her. The court date arrived like an execution notice. October 15th, 2 months away. Pritchard sent word to prepare for a full hearing. Both sides would present evidence. Both sides would call witnesses. The judge would make a binding decision. "This is it," the lawyer wrote. "Make sure you're ready." Ethan spent the next weeks going over every detail of his case with Pritchard. They practiced testimony, anticipated Margaret's arguments, built their narrative around one central truth. These children had been abandoned, and they were thriving now. But there was one piece missing. "We need Lena to testify," Pritchard said during their final meeting before the hearing. "Her account of what happened is our strongest evidence. She's terrified of seeing her aunt again." "I know. But without her testimony, we're relying on circumstantial evidence and hearsay. The aunt will paint a picture of a woman doing her best with limited means. Lena can counter that with the truth." Ethan rubbed his face. "She's 10 years old, and she's the only one who knows what really happened in that house." That night, Ethan sat Lena down and explained what the lawyer needed. "I have to talk?" Her voice was small. "In front of everyone?" "Just to the judge. And yes, your aunt will be there, but so will I, and Mr. Pritchard, and you'll only have to tell the truth about what you experienced." "What if I can't? What if I freeze up?" "Then we'll figure out another way. But Lena..." He took her hands. "This is our best chance. The judge needs to hear from you, needs to understand what you went through." Lena's face was pale but determined. "Will it help us win?" "It might." "Then I'll do it." "You're sure?" "No, but I'll do it anyway." She met his eyes. Because this is worth fighting for. 2 days before the hearing, Ethan went into town to pick up supplies and found the Hendersons outside the feed store. Mary Henderson, who'd closed her door when Lena knocked 2 months ago. "Ethan," she said, her face flushed. "I heard about the court case. News travels fast. I want you to know, if I'd realized those children were in real danger, I would have helped. I thought they were just beggars, people passing through." "They were children, barefoot and carrying a dying baby." Mary's face crumpled. "I know, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I want to help now. I'll testify if you need me to. I'll tell the judge I turned them away and I was wrong." Ethan studied her, this woman who'd chosen comfort over compassion and now wanted absolution. "Keep your testimony," he said. "We don't need it." He walked away, leaving her standing in the street, and felt no satisfaction in it. The night before the hearing, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible outcome. What he'd say if they won. What he'd do if they lost. Around midnight, he heard footsteps on the stairs, a soft knock on his door. "Ethan?" Lena's voice barely above a whisper. "Come in." She padded into the room, Mara in her arms. The baby was awake, eyes bright in the darkness. "Can't sleep?" Ethan asked. "No, too scared." She hesitated. "Can we stay here? Just for tonight?" "Of course." Lena climbed onto the bed, settled against the headboard with Mara in her lap. For a while they sat in silence, listening to the night sounds filtering through the window. "What if we lose tomorrow?" Lena asked finally. "Then we'll appeal, fight it another way." "And if that doesn't work?" Ethan had promised himself he wouldn't lie to her. "Then we'll have to accept the judge's decision." "I don't want to go back." Her voice broke. "I can't go back to her." "I know." "She'll punish me. For telling, for running away. She'll make everything worse." "We're not going to let that happen." "But what if—" "Lena." He turned to face her. "Look at me. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know something. You changed my life, you and Mara. You brought light back into a house that had been dark for too long. You gave me a reason to care about the future again. And no matter what the judge says, that's real. That matters." Tears streamed down Lena's face. "You changed my life too. You were the first door that opened, the first person who saw me and didn't look away. Then we've given each other a gift, and whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Promise." "Promise." They sat in the darkness, a makeshift family on the eve of judgment, and held on to each other against the uncertainty of tomorrow. Outside, the Wyoming night stretched vast and indifferent. Inside, 3 hearts beat in fragile hope. And when dawn came, they would face whatever waited. Together. Morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made everything feel too sharp, too real. Ethan stood at the kitchen window, watching the sun climb over the eastern ridge, turning the grassland gold. His coffee had gone cold in his cup. Behind him, Lena moved through her morning routine with mechanical precision, feeding Mara, tidying the already tidy kitchen, straightening her dress for the 3rd time. "You don't have to do that," Ethan said without turning around. "Do what?" "Clean when you're nervous. The house is fine." Her hand stilled on the dish rag. "I need to do something or I'll fall apart." "Then fall apart. I'll catch you." She made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "We should go soon. Mr. Pritchard said to be there early." "I know." But neither of them moved, as if by staying in this kitchen, in this moment before everything changed, they could somehow keep the future at bay. Finally, Ethan set down his cup. "You ready?" "No, but let's go anyway." They took the wagon into town, Mara bundled against the October chill in blankets Sarah had stitched years ago. Lena sat rigid beside Ethan, her hands clenched white in her lap. She'd braided her hair with painful neatness, put on the dress Mrs. Chen had given her, simple blue cotton, clean and pressed. She looked like what she was, a child trying desperately to appear respectable. "Remember what Mr. Pritchard told you," Ethan said as the town came into view. "Just answer the questions honestly. Don't elaborate unless they ask. And if you need a break, I know. I'll be fine." "You don't have to be fine. You just have to be honest." She nodded, but he could see her trembling. The courthouse sat at the end of Main Street, a brick building that served double duty as a meeting hall and occasional church. By the time they arrived, a small crowd had gathered on the steps. Word had spread, as it always did in small towns. People wanted to see the spectacle of a widowed rancher fighting for orphans against their bloodkin. Ethan helped Lena down from the wagon, Mara in his arms. As they climbed the steps, he felt eyes tracking them, heard whispers that cut off when he looked their direction. Mary Henderson stood near the door, her face miserable. Tom Brennan gave him a tight nod of support. And there, near the front, stood Margaret Hale. She dressed for battle in severe black, her hair pulled back so tight it must have hurt. Beside her stood a man Ethan didn't recognize, thin, sharp-faced, expensive suit. Her lawyer, probably. When Margaret's eyes landed on Lena, her mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Lena made a small sound and pressed closer to Ethan. "Don't look at her," he murmured. "Look at me." She did, and he saw the terror there, barely controlled. "You're safe," he said. "I promise." Pritchard met them inside, his face grave. "We're in courtroom 2. Judge Morrison presiding. He's fair but old-fashioned, values blood ties and traditional family structures." "That's not encouraging." "It's the truth, but we've got a strong case. Just stick to what we practiced." They filed into the courtroom, a sparse room with wooden benches and high windows that let in dusty shafts of light. The judge's bench sat elevated at the front, empty for now. Margaret and her lawyer took seats on the left side. Ethan, Lena, and Pritchard settled on the right. The room filled slowly. Doc Reinhardt came in, nodding to Ethan. Mrs. Chen, clutching a handkerchief. Tom Brennan. Pastor Williams. A few townspeople Ethan recognized but couldn't name. And in the back, trying to be inconspicuous, Sheriff Dawson. At precisely 9 o'clock, the bailiff called, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Walter Morrison." The judge entered. A man in his 60s with iron-gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent his youth outdoors before the law claimed him. He settled behind the bench, adjusted his spectacles, and surveyed the room with the expression of someone who'd seen too many sad stories and expected to see another. "Be seated." His voice carried weight without volume. "We're here today for a guardianship hearing in the matter of Lena Hale and Mara Hale, minors. Mrs. Margaret Hale has filed a petition to regain custody of her nieces, currently in the care of Mr. Ethan Cole, who has filed a counterpetition for permanent guardianship." He looked from Margaret to Ethan. "This is a civil matter, but I'll remind everyone present that the welfare of 2 children hangs in the balance. I expect honesty, respect, and brevity. Counselors, you may begin." Margaret's lawyer stood first, a man who introduced himself as Mr. Cornelius Webb from Cheyenne. His voice was smooth as oil and twice as slick. "Your Honor, this is a simple case of family reunification. Mrs. Hale is the blood aunt of these children, their closest living relative, who took them in when their mother died. Due to temporary financial hardship, she made the difficult decision to direct them to a charitable mission that could better provide for their needs. Before she could make proper arrangements, Mr. Cole, a stranger to these children, intercepted them and has since refused to return them to their rightful guardian." Pritchard rose, his voice steady. "Your Honor, what Mr. Webb calls directing them to a mission was in fact child abandonment. Mrs. Hale put a 10-year-old girl and a 5-month-old infant out of her home with minimal supplies and sent them on a 60-mile journey in the height of summer. The children arrived at Mr. Cole's ranch in a state of severe dehydration and malnutrition. He has since provided excellent care, and the children have thrived under his guardianship. We ask the court to grant him permanent custody on the grounds that Mrs. Hale is demonstrably unfit." Judge Morrison made a note. "We'll hear testimony from both sides. Mr. Webb, call your first witness." Webb stood. "The petitioner calls Mrs. Margaret Hale." Margaret walked to the witness stand with her head high, one hand smoothing her severe black dress. She was sworn in, settled into the chair, and folded her hands in her lap with an air of wounded dignity. Webb began gently. "Mrs. Hale, can you tell the court about your relationship with your nieces?" "Of course." Her voice was soft, cultivated. "My sister, Lena, and Mara's mother died in childbirth last March. I took the girls in immediately, despite my limited means. I'm a widow myself, Your Honor. I live on a small pension and what I can earn taking in sewing. It's not much, but I may do." "Why did you ask the children to leave your home?" Margaret's eyes glistened. A masterful performance. "It broke my heart. but I simply couldn't afford to feed 3 mouths anymore. The baby needed milk, special care. Lena was, she paused delicately, difficult, willful. She refused to help around the house, talked back constantly, made caring for the infant nearly impossible. Ethan felt Lena stiffen beside him. He put a hand on her shoulder, felt her trembling with suppressed fury. "So you made arrangements for them?" Webb prompted. "Yes. I researched missions in the territory and found one in Douglas, with an excellent reputation. I gave Lena clear directions, provisions for the journey, and money for the train if they could reach the depot." "You gave them money?" $5. Enough for train fare and then some." Margaret looked directly at the judge. "I never intended for them to walk the entire distance. The train depot is only 8 miles from my home. But Lena, she's always been impulsive. She must have panicked and run off in the wrong direction." It was a lie so smooth it almost sounded like truth. Ethan saw Pritchard making notes, his expression neutral. Webb continued, "When did you discover the children were with Mr. Cole?" "Not until I made inquiries at the mission and learned they'd never arrived. I was frantic, Your Honor. I asked around town and eventually heard rumors that a rancher had taken in 2 girls. When I went to retrieve my nieces, Mr. Cole refused to let me see them, claimed I'd abandoned them, threatened me." "Did he make any demands?" "He said if I tried to take them, he'd have me arrested. He was—" Margaret's voice trembled artfully. "He was quite aggressive, Your Honor. I left in fear for my safety." "Thank you, Mrs. Hale. No further questions." Pritchard stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. He approached the witness stand with the air of a man who had all the time in the world. "Mrs. Hale, you testified you gave Lena $5 for train fare. Do you have any proof of this?" Margaret blinked. "Proof? A receipt, a notation in a household ledger, anything documenting this transaction." No. It was cash from my personal funds." "I see. And these provisions you mentioned, what exactly did you give them?" "Bread, water, the essentials." "How much bread?" "A loaf." "A whole loaf? Or a portion?" Margaret's composure flickered. "A portion, half, I believe." "And water?" "A canteen full." "One canteen. For 2 children traveling 60 miles in July." Pritchard let that hang. "Did you give them any other supplies, blankets, additional clothing, money for food?" "I gave them what I could afford." "Yes or no, Mrs. Hale? Did you give them anything other than half a loaf of bread, 1 canteen of water, and the alleged $5? "No." "Thank you. Now, you stated that Lena was difficult and willful. Can you give specific examples?" Margaret's jaw tightened. "She talked back, refused to do chores properly, let the baby cry excessively." "What chores did you ask a 10-year-old to perform?" "Cooking, cleaning, basic household tasks." "All the cooking, or just helping?" "Most of it. I have arthritis in my hands, and so a 10-year-old child was responsible for preparing all meals, cleaning your home, and caring for an infant. Is that accurate?" "She was earning her keep." "Earning her keep." Pritchard repeated the word slowly. "You also mentioned the baby cried excessively. Did you seek medical attention for her?" "I couldn't afford a doctor." "But you could afford to send them away with $5 for train fare?" Margaret's face flushed. "That's different." "How?" "I was trying to get them to a place that could help them. By sending a child on an 8-mile walk to a train depot with no guarantee she could find it, in territory she didn't know." Pritchard's voice was mild, but the words landed like hammer blows. "Mrs. Hale, did you actually expect them to reach the depot?" "Of course I did." "Then why didn't you accompany them, or arrange for someone to escort them?" "I had other obligations." "More important than ensuring the safety of 2 children in your care?" Webb rose. "Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness." "Sustained. Mr. Pritchard, keep your questions direct." Pritchard nodded. "Mrs. Hale, you testified that you sent the children to a mission in Douglas. Did you write to this mission in advance? Arrange for their arrival?" No. I assumed they would take anyone in need." "You assumed, but you didn't verify." Pritchard pulled a paper from his folder. "I have here a letter from the director of the Douglas mission. It states that they require advance notice for new placements, that they were at capacity in July, and that they would never accept an infant without prior medical evaluation. Were you aware of these requirements? Margaret's face had gone pale. No? So you sent 2 children on a 60-mile journey to a facility that, even if they'd arrived, might not have taken them in. I was doing my best. Were you? Pritchard's voice was quiet now, almost gentle, which somehow made it more devastating. Or were you removing an inconvenience from your life? How dare you? You mentioned a gentleman caller in your deposition, a Mr. Billings. Were you concerned that the presence of 2 young children might impact that relationship? Margaret's mouth opened and closed. That has nothing to do with... Answer the question, please. Did Mr. Billings express reluctance about your guardianship of your nieces? He mentioned that children were a significant responsibility. And 2 days after he made that comment, you put those children out of your home, correct? The courtroom was silent. Margaret gripped the armrests of her chair, and for the first time her careful composure cracked. I did what I thought was best, she said, but her voice wavered. Best for whom, Mrs. Hale? The children? Or yourself? Objection! Webb was on his feet. Your Honor, this is inflammatory? Overruled. The witness will answer. Margaret's eyes flashed with anger. I took those girls in when no one else would. I fed them, housed them, and that child, she pointed at Lena. She was ungrateful, disobedient. She made my life miserable. So yes, I sent them away. And I'd do it again. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Morrison's gavel cracked like thunder. Order! I'll have order! He looked at Margaret with something like distaste. Mrs. Hale, you may step down. Margaret returned to her seat, her face rigid with fury. Webb leaned over to whisper something to her, but she shook him off. Pritchard called Doc Reinhardt first. The doctor testified to the girls' condition when he examined them. Lena's scarred feet, her malnourished state, Mara's severe dehydration. In your professional opinion, how long had the infant been without adequate water? Pritchard asked. At least 48 hours, possibly 72. Much longer and she would have suffered organ damage or death. And the older child's feet? Consistent with walking barefoot over rough terrain for an extended period. Multiple blisters had burst and become infected. She would have been in considerable pain. Webb's cross-examination was brief and ineffective. The medical evidence was irrefutable. Mrs. Chen testified next, describing Mara's transformation from a listless, failing infant to a healthy, thriving baby. Tom Brennan spoke to Ethan's character and the visible improvement in the ranch since the girls arrived. Pastor Williams vouched for Ethan's standing in the community. And then Pritchard said, the defense calls Lena Hale. Lena stood slowly. Ethan squeezed her hand once before letting go. She walked to the witness stand on legs that barely held her, was sworn in, and sat down in the chair that was too large for her frame. Pritchard approached gently. Lena, I know this is frightening, but I need you to tell the judge, in your own words, what happened at your aunt's house. Can you do that? Lena's voice was barely audible. Yes, sir. Start with when you first went to live with her. Lena swallowed hard. It was right after Mama died. Aunt Margaret came to the house and said we had to leave because Mama didn't own it. She took us to her place in Laramie. It was small. 1 bedroom. She said we'd have to sleep in the kitchen. How did she treat you? At first it was okay, but then she started saying I had to earn our keep. She'd make me cook all the meals, clean the whole house, do the washing, and I had to take care of Mara, feed her, change her, keep her quiet. How old were you? 9 when we got there. I turned 10 in June. Did your aunt help with the baby? No, she said Mara was my responsibility, that I was old enough to manage. Lena's hands twisted in her lap. But sometimes Mara would cry, and I couldn't make her stop. And Aunt Margaret would get angry. She'd yell at me, call me useless, say I was just like my mama, good for nothing. Margaret made a sound of protest, but Webb put a hand on her arm. Pritchard's voice remained gentle. Did she ever hurt you? She'd slap me if I talked back, or if dinner wasn't ready on time, or if Mara cried during her gentleman caller's visits. Lena looked up at the judge, and her voice steadied. She had a beau, Mr. Billings. He'd come on Sundays, and she wanted everything perfect. Said if the house was too noisy or messy, he'd think she was a poor housekeeper, so I had to keep Mara outside during his visits. Even in bad weather? Yes, sir. One time it was real cold and Mara got sick, a fever. She cried all night, but Aunt Margaret said I couldn't bring her inside until Mr. Billings left, so I stayed in the barn with her. Lena's voice cracked. I thought she was going to die. I was so scared. What happened next? The fever broke by morning, but Aunt Margaret was angry. Said I'd embarrassed her in front of Mr. Billings. 2 days later, she told me to pack our things. Lena's hands clenched. She gave me a piece of bread and a canteen, said there was a mission in Douglas that takes orphans, told me to walk north and keep walking. Did she give you money? No, sir, just the bread and water. Did she give you directions? A map? She pointed north and said to follow the road. Said it was 60 miles and I was smart enough to figure it out. What did you do? I left, because she said if I didn't, she'd call the sheriff and have me arrested for trespassing. Lena's voice dropped. I was scared, so I just started walking. Can you tell the judge what that walk was like? Lena looked down at her hands. When she spoke, her voice was flat, reciting facts. It was hot. The sun made everything shimmer. Mara cried for the first day, but then she got too weak to cry. I tried to ration the water, but it ran out on the second day. The bread got moldy. My feet started bleeding, but I couldn't stop because stopping meant dying. She looked up. I knocked on doors, lots of doors, but nobody answered, or they'd look through the window and turn away, so I just kept walking. How did you end up at Mr. Cole's ranch? I saw the smoke from his chimney. I thought, her voice broke. I thought maybe one more door, maybe one more try. I didn't have anything left to lose. What happened when you knocked? He answered, and he looked at me, really looked, and I asked him for work, because I didn't want charity. I wanted to earn a place, and he... Lena's eyes filled with tears. He said to come inside. He gave Mara water. He let us stay. And he didn't ask for anything except for us to rest. Pritchard let the silence stretch. Then he asked, Are you happy at Mr. Cole's ranch? Yes, sir. It's the first place that's ever felt like home. Thank you, Lena. No further questions. Webb stood for cross-examination, and Ethan's hands clenched into fists. Miss Hale, you testified that your aunt was cruel to you, but isn't it true that you were a difficult child? Disobedient? I talked back sometimes when she said mean things about my mama. So you admit to being disrespectful. I was defending my mother's memory. And you let the baby cry excessively, correct? Babies cry. I did my best to soothe her, but I was 9 years old. I didn't always know what to do. Your aunt says she gave you $5 for train fare. Do you remember that? No, sir, because it never happened. Are you calling your aunt a liar? I'm telling the truth. Lena's voice was steady now. She didn't give me money. She didn't give me directions to the train depot. She gave me a piece of bread, a canteen of water, and told me to walk north until I found the mission. And when I asked what if I couldn't find it, she said that wasn't her problem anymore. Webb's mouth tightened. No further questions. Judge Morrison looked at Lena with an expression that might have been sympathy. You may step down, child. Lena returned to her seat beside Ethan, and he pulled her close. She was shaking like a leaf in a storm. You did good, he whispered. So good. Pritchard called Ethan last. The questions were straightforward. How the girls came to him, what condition they were in, how they'd improved under his care. Ethan answered honestly, without embellishment. When Webb cross-examined, his tone was sharp. Mr. Cole, you're a single man, no wife, no children of your own. Why would you want to take on 2 young girls? Because they needed help, and I could provide it. Some might question your motives. Ethan's voice went cold. Then let them question. I've got nothing to hide. Those girls came to my door dying, and I gave them life. That's all the motive anyone needs. You have no experience raising children. Neither did their aunt, apparently. But I'm learning, and I'm doing it with care and intention. What happens when these girls become teenagers, when they need a mother's guidance? I'll find women in the community to help. Mrs. Chen has already offered. The pastor's wife, others. Takes a village to raise a child, Mr. Webb. I'm not too proud to ask for help. Webb tried a few more angles, but Ethan didn't waver. Finally, the lawyer sat down and Judge Morrison called for closing arguments. Pritchard stood. Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Mrs. Hale abandoned these children in a manner that nearly cost them their lives. Mr. Cole saved them and has provided excellent care. The girls are healthy, happy, and thriving. We ask the court to grant him permanent guardianship and terminate Mrs. Hale's parental rights. Webb countered, Your Honor, blood is blood, Mrs. Buddy. Hale made a mistake born of desperation, but she remains these children's closest living relative. Mr. Cole is a stranger with no legal claim. We ask the court to return the children to their rightful guardian with provisions for oversight to ensure their welfare. Judge Morrison was silent for a long moment. Then he said, I'll take this matter under advisement. Both parties will be notified of my decision within 1 week. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell, and just like that, it was over. They filed out of the courtroom into the October afternoon. Ethan felt hollowed out, scraped clean. Lena walked beside him in silence, Mara heavy in his arms. Pritchard caught up to them on the courthouse steps. You did well in there, both of you. How do you think it'll go? Ethan asked. I don't know. Morrison's hard to read, but your testimony was strong, and Lena, he looked at the girl. You were very brave. I just told the truth. Sometimes that's the bravest thing. They parted ways at the wagon. As Ethan helped Lena up, he saw Margaret watching from across the street, her face a mask of cold fury. Their eyes met, and she mouthed something he couldn't hear but understood perfectly. This isn't over. The ride home was silent. Lena stared at the landscape rolling past, her face unreadable. Mara slept against Ethan's chest, oblivious to the weight of what had just happened. When they reached the ranch, Lena climbed down from the wagon and went straight to the barn. Ethan followed, found her sitting in an empty stall, her arms wrapped around her knees. Talk to me, he said quietly. I saw her face when I was testifying. She looked at me like... Lena's voice broke. Like she hated me. She's angry because you told the truth, because you exposed what she did. What if the judge believes her? What if he thinks I'm lying? He won't. You were honest. That matters. Does it? Lena looked up at him with ancient eyes. Because it feels like the truth doesn't matter as much as blood. Ethan had no answer for that. Because she was right. Blood did matter in the eyes of the law. And no matter how strong their case, Margaret had one advantage they couldn't overcome. She was family, and he was just a stranger who'd opened a door. That night, Ethan couldn't eat. He pushed food around his plate while Lena fed Mara with mechanical precision. The silence in the kitchen was oppressive, filled with all the things they couldn't say. Finally, Lena spoke. If we have to go back, I'll run away. Lena, I mean it. I'll take Mara and I'll run, and I won't stop running. And then what? You'll be a fugitive. They'll track you down. It'll be worse. It can't be worse than going back to her. Ethan reached across the table, took her hand. Listen to me. We don't know what the judge will decide. Maybe he'll rule in our favor. But if he doesn't, if he sends you back, we'll find another way. I'll appeal. I'll fight this all the way to the territorial Supreme Court if I have to. And what if that doesn't work either? Then I'll think of something else. I'm not giving up on you. Not ever. Lena's eyes filled with tears. You promise? I promise. But even as he said it, Ethan felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down. Because promises were fragile things in the face of legal precedent and blood rights. And all they could do was wait. The next 7 days crawled past like wounded animals. Ethan tried to maintain routine, feeding cattle, mending fence, the ordinary work of a working ranch. But everything felt provisional, temporary, like he was building sandcastles before a rising tide. Lena worked herself to exhaustion, as if by being indispensable she could somehow force the universe to let her stay. Ethan tried to slow her down, but she was relentless. On the 5th day, Tom Brennan found him in the north pasture. Word around town is the judge is taking his time with this one. That's good, right? Means he's really thinking it through. Or it means he's trying to figure out how to rule against us without looking heartless. Tom spat tobacco juice. You're a pessimist, Cole. I'm a realist. Same damn thing. Tom squinted at the horizon. For what it's worth, I think you did right by those girls, and most folks in town agree. We're pulling for you. Appreciate it. But public opinion didn't sway judges. Only law did. On the 7th day, a rider came at noon, young kid from the courthouse, carrying an envelope sealed with red wax. Ethan's hand shook as he took it. Thank you. The kid tipped his hat and rode off, leaving Ethan standing in the yard with his future in his hands. Lena appeared on the porch, Mara in her arms. Is that? Yeah. What does it say? Ethan looked at the envelope. at this thin paper barrier between hope and heartbreak. Then he looked at Lena, at this child who'd walked through fire and learned to trust again. "Let's find out together," he said. They sat on the porch steps, the three of them, and Ethan broke the seal. The paper trembled in Ethan's hands as he unfolded it, the official seal of the territorial court stark against the cream-colored stationery. Beside him, Lena had gone perfectly still, not even breathing. Mara cooed softly, reaching for the letter with chubby fingers, oblivious to the weight of the moment. Ethan cleared his throat and began to read aloud. In the matter of the guardianship petition for Lena Marie Hale and Mara Rose Hale, minors, the court finds as follows. His voice caught, and he had to stop, swallow hard. After careful consideration of the testimony and evidence presented, including the medical documentation provided by Dr. Samuel Reinhardt, the court acknowledges that the minors were found in a state of severe distress and that their condition has markedly improved under the care of Mr. Ethan Cole. Lena's hand found his, gripping tight enough to hurt. However, Ethan continued, his heart sinking at that single word, the court must balance the welfare of the children against the established legal preference for placement with blood relatives. Mrs. Margaret Hale, despite her acknowledged errors in judgment, retains her status as the children's closest living kin. No. Lena's whisper was barely audible. No, no, no. Let me finish. Ethan's voice was rough. Therefore, the court orders the following. Custody of the minor children shall be granted to Mr. Ethan Cole on a conditional basis for a period of 6 months, during which time Mrs. Margaret Hale shall be permitted supervised monthly visitation. At the conclusion of this probationary period, the court shall reconvene to determine permanent placement based on the welfare and expressed preference of the children, particularly the older child, Lena Marie Hale, who shall be given significant weight in the final determination given her age and capacity for reasoned judgment. The words took a moment to penetrate. Ethan read the paragraph again, silently this time, making sure he'd understood correctly. Furthermore, he continued, his voice strengthening, Mr. Cole is hereby appointed temporary legal guardian with full authority to make decisions regarding the children's education, medical care, and general welfare. Mrs. Hale's visitation rights are contingent upon her compliance with court-ordered supervision and her demonstrated ability to interact with the children in a manner conducive to their emotional well-being. Signed, Judge Walter Morrison, 14th Circuit Court. Silence fell over the porch, broken only by the wind moving through the grass and Mara's happy babbling. What does that mean? Lena asked finally, her voice small. In words I can understand? Ethan set the letter down carefully, turned to face her. It means you're staying, for 6 months at least. Maybe longer, maybe forever, if that's what you want when the time comes. And Aunt Margaret? She can visit, once a month, but someone from the court has to be there watching. She can't take you, can't be alone with you, can't do anything without supervision. Lena's face crumpled, and then she was sobbing, great wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Ethan pulled her close, let her cry against his chest, while Mara patted her sister's head with solemn concern. We won, Lena managed between sobs. We actually won. Not completely, not yet, but we got time, we got a chance. That's more than I thought we'd get. She pulled back, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. 6 months. That's until April? Around then, yeah. And then what happens? Then we go back to court, and the judge asks you what you want. And your answer matters. He said so right there in the ruling. So if I say I want to stay with you, then you've got a damn good chance of making it permanent. Ethan smoothed her hair back from her face. But Lena, that's 6 months away. Let's not borrow trouble from tomorrow. Today, we celebrate. Today, we won. A smile broke through her tears, tentative at first, then widening into something that transformed her whole face. We won. We did. Can I hug you? Like a real hug? Kid, you can hug me anytime you want. She threw her arms around him, Mara sandwiched between them, and Ethan felt something in his chest that had been locked tight for 3 years finally break open. Not grief this time. Something else. Something that felt dangerously close to joy. They sat there on the porch steps until the sun began its descent toward the western ridge, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Eventually, Lena pulled back, her face blotchy but peaceful. I should start dinner, she said. I should help you. You never help with dinner. Well, maybe I should start. We're celebrating after all. They made their way inside, and for the first time since Ethan could remember, the house felt full. Not just occupied, but lived in, loved in. The kitchen rang with Lena's voice as she directed him through peeling potatoes, with Mara's laughter as she banged a wooden spoon against her high chair, with the ordinary sounds of a family going about the ordinary business of living. After dinner, Ethan sat at the table while Lena washed dishes, and he reread the court order more carefully. The language was dense, legal, but the meaning was clear enough. He had 6 months to prove he could provide a stable home. 6 months to show that these children thrived under his care. 6 months before Margaret could mount another challenge, and she would challenge it. He had no illusions about that. The look on her face outside the courthouse had told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. But for tonight, he'd take the win. The next morning brought practical realities. Ethan rode into town to meet with Pritchard, who was cautiously optimistic about the ruling. Morrison split the baby, so to speak, the lawyer said, leaning back in his chair. Gave you what you needed without completely severing Margaret's parental claim. It's actually rather clever. How so? He's putting the burden of proof on her. If she behaves during these supervised visits, if she shows genuine care for the children's welfare, she might have a case for restoration of custody. But if she doesn't, if she's angry or vindictive or controlling, it'll only strengthen your position. So we need to document everything. Everything. I'll arrange for the court-appointed supervisor to provide detailed reports after each visit. You should keep a journal too. Note the children's behavior before and after each visit, any statements they make, any changes in mood or demeanor. Ethan rubbed his face. This feels like setting a trap. It's protecting those children. There's a difference. Is there? Pritchard's expression softened. I know this isn't how you wanted it to end. You wanted a clean break, permanent custody, no more uncertainty. But Morrison gave you something better. He gave you time to build an unassailable case. Use it wisely. Ethan left the lawyer's office with a list of instructions and a knot of anxiety in his gut. 6 months of supervised visits, 6 months of walking on eggshells, 6 months of waiting for the other shoe to drop. When he got home, he found Lena in the barn, teaching Mara how to collect eggs. The baby was too young to be of any real help, but she toddled after her sister with determined steps, her hands outstretched toward the chickens. Gentle, Lena was saying. You have to be gentle or they'll peck you. Mara grabbed a handful of feathers. The hen squawked indignantly and flapped away. Lena laughed and scooped her sister up. Well, I tried to warn you. Ethan leaned against the barn door, watching them. This was what he was fighting for. Not just 2 children, but this. The sound of laughter in a space that had been silent. The simple joy of teaching and learning. The everyday miracles of ordinary life. How was town? Lena called when she spotted him. Informative. Mr. Pritchard says we need to keep detailed records, document everything over the next 6 months. Something shuddered in Lena's expression. Because Aunt Margaret's coming to visit. Yeah, once a month. Starting next week, probably. Lena set Mara down, watched her toddle toward a pile of hay. I don't want to see her. I know, but it's part of the deal. What if she says mean things? What if she tries to convince me to come back with her? She can't take you, not without a court order, and she won't get one if she behaves badly during these visits. So we just have to endure it. For 6 months, then it's your choice, your voice. The judge said so. Lena nodded slowly, but Ethan could see the fear settling back into her shoulders, the tension that had finally started to ease creeping back in. That night, he found her scrubbing the kitchen floor again, her hands red and raw. Lena, stop. It's dirty. It's fine. You cleaned it yesterday. But what if she comes and it's not perfect? What if she tells the supervisor the house is a mess and I'm being neglected? Ethan crouched down beside her, gently took the brush from her hands. Listen to me. Margaret doesn't get to define what's acceptable anymore. The court does. And the court already saw evidence that you're thriving here. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be yourself. What if myself isn't good enough? It is. Trust me. It's more than good enough. But he could see she didn't believe him. The old patterns were too deeply ingrained. Work until you drop. Earn your place. Prove your worth. One court ruling couldn't undo months of conditioning, so Ethan did the only thing he could think of. He sat down on the floor beside her and said, "Tell me about your mama. What was she like?" Lena blinked, surprised by the change of subject. "My mama?" "Yeah. You've mentioned her a few times, but I'd like to know more, if you want to share." Lena set down the brush, drew her knees up to her chest. She was beautiful, not in a fancy way, but in how she moved, how she smiled. She had this laugh that made everyone around her laugh too, even if they didn't know what was funny. What did she do, for work? She was a seamstress, made dresses for the ladies in town. She'd let me sit under her sewing table while she worked, and I'd play with the fabric scraps. She'd make up stories about where the dresses were going, fancy balls, secret meetings, adventures. Lena's voice softened with memory. She said every dress carried a story, and it was her job to make sure the story was beautiful. Sounds like she was a storyteller. She was. She'd tell me about her grandmama, who came over from Ireland with nothing but a sewing needle and a prayer. Said our family built everything we had with our hands and our hearts, and that was something to be proud of. She was right. When she got sick with Mara, she made me promise to take care of my sister, said sisters were forever, and that Mara would need me. Lena's eyes filled with tears. I promised, and then she died, and I didn't know how to keep the promise because I was just a kid, and Mara was so small and helpless. But you did keep it. You walked 40 miles in killing heat to keep her safe. You found help when everyone else turned you away. Your mama would be proud of you, Lena. So damn proud. Lena wiped her eyes. You think so? I know so. They sat in silence for a while, the kitchen growing dark around them. Finally, Lena said, "Thank you." For what? For asking about her. Aunt Margaret never wanted to hear about Mama, said it was morbid to dwell on the dead, but I don't want to forget her. Then don't. Tell Mara about her when she's older. Keep the stories alive. That's how people stay with us, even after they're gone. Lena nodded, then stood and offered him a hand up. I should get Mara ready for bed. I'll help. They climbed the stairs together, and Ethan felt the fragile peace of the evening settle over them like a blanket. Tomorrow would bring new worries. Next week would bring Margaret. But tonight, they were together. They were safe. And that was enough. The first supervised visit was scheduled for the following Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. The court-appointed supervisor, a stern woman named Mrs. Florence Hodge, arrived precisely on time, clipboard in hand and expression neutral. Mr. Cole, Miss Hale. She nodded to each of them. I'll be observing today's visit and taking notes for the court. My role is strictly as an observer. I won't intervene unless there's a clear safety concern. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, Ethan said. Lena just nodded, her face pale. Margaret arrived 15 minutes later, driving the same buckboard she'd brought before. She'd dressed carefully, a gray dress with black trim, respectable and modest. Her face was composed, almost serene, as if the fury Ethan had seen at the courthouse had never existed. Hello, Lena, dear, she said as she climbed the porch steps. How lovely you look. And is that little Mara? My, how she's grown. The sweetness in her voice was so false it made Ethan's teeth ache, but he kept his expression neutral. Mrs. Hodge was watching everything. Come inside, he said. We'll visit in the front room. They settled into an awkward tableau. Margaret in the armchair, Lena perched on the edge of the sofa with Mara in her lap, Ethan standing near the doorway, and Mrs. Hodge in the corner with her clipboard. So, Margaret began, her smile bright and brittle. Tell me all about your time here, Lena. Have you been happy? Yes, ma'am. That's wonderful. I've been so worried about you both. Not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about you and prayed for your well-being. Lena's hands tightened on Mara, but she said nothing. I hope you know, Margaret continued, her voice dropping into a confidential tone, that I never meant for things to end the way they did. I was simply overwhelmed. The financial burden, the responsibility. I made a mistake, and I've regretted it every day since. Have you? The words slipped out before Lena could stop them. Margaret's smile flickered. Of course I have. You're my sister's children, my blood. I should have found another way. You could have asked for help, from the church, from neighbors, from anyone. Lena, dear, you don't understand how difficult. I understand that you put us out because Mr. Billings didn't want children around. Lena's voice was steady now, clear. I understand that you cared more about impressing a man than keeping us safe. Margaret's face flushed. That's not true. It is true. You told me yourself. You said we were ruining your chances. Mrs. Hodge's pen moved rapidly across her clipboard. Margaret's composure cracked, just for a moment, and Ethan saw the anger flash in her eyes. But she controlled it, forced the smile back into place. I think you've misremembered, dear. Grief can do that. It can twist our memories into something they're not. My memory is fine. Well, Margaret smoothed her skirt with sharp, precise movements. Regardless of the past, I'm here now. I want to rebuild our relationship. I want to be a part of your lives again. Why? Lena asked. Because you're family. We weren't family when you threw us out. We weren't family when you sent us walking through the desert with no food. We weren't family when I knocked on doors and nobody answered. Lena's voice rose. We weren't family until Mr. Cole took us in and gave us a home. He's more family than you ever were. Mara started to cry, picking up on her sister's distress. Lena rocked her automatically, her eyes never leaving Margaret's face. I see he's turned you against me, Margaret said coldly. Poisoned your mind with lies. Nobody's poisoned anything, Ethan interjected. Lena's telling her truth. You can accept it or not, but you can't rewrite what happened. Margaret stood abruptly. This is exactly what I warned the judge about. This man is manipulating these children, making them say terrible things about me. He's... Mrs. Hale. Mrs. Hodge's voice cut through the rising tension like a knife. Please sit down. Margaret stared at her, then slowly sank back into the chair. I'm here to observe the interaction between you and your nieces, Mrs. Hodge continued, her tone neutral but firm. What I'm observing is a child expressing honest feelings about past trauma, and an adult becoming defensive rather than listening. I suggest you reconsider your approach. Margaret's mouth opened and closed. Finally, she said, I apologize. You're right. This is difficult for me. It's difficult for Lena, too, Mrs. Hodge pointed out. Perhaps you might try asking her about her current life, rather than focusing on the past. Margaret took a breath, visibly composing herself. All right. Lena, dear, what have you been doing here? Are you going to school? Not yet, mister. Cole said we'd start in January after the holidays. And what do you do all day? I help with the ranch, feed the chickens, collect eggs, I'm learning to ride a horse, and I take care of Mara. That's a lot of responsibility. I don't mind. I like it. Surely you must get lonely. No other children to play with. Just an old man for company. I'm not lonely, and Ethan's not old. Still, it can't be healthy. A girl your age needs proper female influence, a mother figure. Lena's expression hardened. I have Mrs. Chen, and the pastor's wife visits, and I had a mother. She died. You don't get to replace her. The visit limped along for another 30 minutes, each exchange more stilted than the last. Margaret tried different tactics, cajoling, guilt-tripping, veiled criticisms of Ethan's guardianship, but Lena deflected each one with a composure that belied her age. Finally, Mrs. Hodge checked her watch and announced, I believe that's sufficient for today's visit. Margaret stood, smoothing her skirt. May I at least hug my nieces goodbye? Mrs. Hodge looked at Lena. Would you like to hug your aunt? Lena hesitated, then shook her head. No, thank you. Something ugly crossed Margaret's face, quickly suppressed. I see. Well, until next month, then. She left without another word, her back rigid with barely contained fury. After the door closed behind her, Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Mrs. Hodge finished her notes, then looked up at Lena with something that might have been approval. You conducted yourself very well, young lady, she said, very honestly. Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Cole, I'll submit my report to the court by week's end. You'll receive a copy. She tucked her clipboard under her arm. If I may offer an unofficial observation, that child knows her own mind. The judge would do well to listen to her. After Mrs. Hodge left, Lena sagged against the sofa, all the strength draining out of her. I thought I was going to be sick, she whispered. But you weren't. You stood up for yourself, for the truth. She hates me now. She hated you before. This just made it obvious. Lena looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. Is it always going to be like this? Every month? I don't know. Maybe she'll get better at hiding her anger, or maybe she'll give up when she realizes you're not coming back to her. Ethan sat down beside her. But whatever happens, you don't have to face it alone. I'll be right here. Every visit. Every month. Promise? Promise. That night, after Lena had finally fallen into exhausted sleep, Ethan sat on the porch with a cup of coffee gone cold and stared out at the dark land. The wind carried the smell of coming winter, crisp and clean and edged with frost. 6 more months of this. 6 more visits. 6 more opportunities for Margaret to dig her claws in and try to drag those children back into her orbit. But Ethan had something Margaret didn't. He had time. He had truth. And he had 2 children who were finally learning what it meant to be safe. The next morning, a letter arrived. Ethan almost didn't open it, assuming it was something official from the court. But the handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, the postmark from Denver. He broke the seal with wary hands. Father, I got your letter. I'm still angry. I'm probably going to be angry for a long time. But I've been thinking about what you said, about Mother wanting this. And I remember how she used to feed every stray that wandered onto our property. How she'd take in anyone who needed help without a second thought. If she were alive, she'd have taken those girls in herself. I know that. And she'd have kicked my ass for not helping you when you asked. So I'm coming home. Not to forgive you. I'm not there yet. But to meet these kids you're fighting for. To see if they're worth all this trouble. I'll be there in 2 weeks. James Ethan read the letter 3 times, each word sinking in slowly. His son was coming home. After 3 years of silence, of blame and bitterness and estrangement, James was coming home. He wasn't sure if it was a blessing or just another complication waiting to happen. But it was something, and right now, something felt like enough. 2 weeks felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Ethan found himself cleaning rooms that hadn't been touched in years, airing out his son's bedroom, trying to remember what James liked to eat. Lena watched these preparations with growing curiosity. You're nervous, she observed one morning as Ethan reorganized the pantry for the 3rd time. That obvious? You reorganized that shelf yesterday, and the day before. She leaned against the doorframe, Mara on her hip. Is it because of your son? Yeah. Are you scared he won't like us? Ethan stopped, turned to face her. I'm scared of a lot of things. That he'll still be angry. That seeing me will make everything worse. That he'll think I'm using you girls to replace what I lost. He rubbed his face. But mostly I'm scared he'll look at this life we're building and see it as a betrayal of his mother. Is it? No. At least I don't think so. Sarah would have loved you both. Would have opened that door even faster than I did. His voice softened. But James might not see it that way. Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, When he comes, I'll make myself scarce. Stay out of the way. That might make it easier. You'll do no such thing. This is your home. You don't hide in your own home. But if it helps? No. Ethan's voice was firm. You and Mara are part of this family now. James needs to understand that. If he can't accept it, that's his problem, not yours. But even as he said it, Ethan felt the weight of the impossible balance he was trying to strike, between honoring his son's grief and protecting these children who'd become his heart, between the past he couldn't change and the future he was desperately trying to build. James arrived on a Thursday afternoon, riding in on a horse that looked as road-weary as its rider. Ethan saw him coming from the north pasture and his chest went tight. 3 years since he'd seen his son, and James had changed. Harder, somehow. Leaner. The softness of youth burned away by whatever he'd been doing in the mines outside Denver. Ethan walked to meet him at the gate. They stood on opposite sides of the fence, father and son, with 3 years of silence between them. You came, Ethan said finally. Said I would. James dismounted, tied his horse to the rail. Though I almost turned back a dozen times. I'm glad you didn't. James looked past him toward the house. They here? The girls? Inside. Probably watching from the window. Ethan managed a small smile. Lena's been nervous about meeting you.
She knows about us. About why I left. She knows we haven't spoken in 3 years. She knows it's because of your mother. The details are yours to share if you want. James nodded slowly, his jaw working. I'm not promising anything. I came to see what this is all about, not to play happy family. I'm not asking you to, just asking you to give them a chance. They walked to the house in silence. As Ethan opened the door, he called out, Lena? James is here. She appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She'd changed into her best dress, braided her hair with care. Mara toddled beside her, one hand clutching her sister's skirt. Hello, Lena said softly. I'm Lena. This is Mara. James stared at them, and something complicated crossed his face. You're younger than I expected. I'm 10. Mara's 8 months now. 8 months? James looked at his father. She was barely alive when they got here, you said. Barely. Doc said another day and we'd have been burying her. James crouched down to Mara's level. The baby regarded him with solemn eyes, then reached out and grabbed his nose. Despite himself, James laughed, a rusty sound, like he'd forgotten how. Strong grip? He said. She's getting stronger every day, Lena said. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot. Yeah, thanks. They settled around the kitchen table, an awkward arrangement of people who didn't quite know how to be together. Lena poured coffee with the careful hospitality of someone determined to make a good impression. Mara banged a spoon against her high chair, providing a soundtrack to the uncomfortable silence. So, James said finally, the court case. How'd it go? Ethan told him about the ruling, the 6-month probation, the supervised visits with Margaret. James listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. And you think you'll win permanent custody? He asked when Ethan finished. I think we've got a good shot, especially after that first visit. Margaret showed her true colors pretty clearly. What happens if you don't win? The question hung in the air. Lena's hand tightened on her coffee cup. Then we appeal, Ethan said, and keep appealing until we run out of options. And if you run out of options, we'll cross that bridge if we come to it. James looked at Lena, really looked at her. You want to stay here? With him? Yes, sir, more than anything. Why? Lena blinked, surprised by the directness of the question. Because he saved our lives. Because this is the first place that's ever felt safe. Because when I wake up in the morning, I'm not scared anymore. You were scared before? Every day. At Aunt Margaret's, I never knew what would make her angry, what would get me slapped or sent outside in the cold. I was always waiting for the next bad thing. She met James's eyes. Here, I'm not waiting anymore. I'm just living. Something shifted in James's expression. He turned to his father. Can I talk to you? Alone? They stepped out onto the porch, leaving Lena inside with Mara. The afternoon sun was already dropping toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold. She seems like a good kid, James said. She is. And you really think you can do this? Raise 2 girls by yourself? I'm not by myself. I've got help. Mrs. Chen, the pastor's wife, Tom Brennan. And if you're asking if I'm capable, yeah, I am. I've learned more about caring for children in the past 4 months than I ever knew was possible. James leaned against the porch rail, staring out at the land. I keep thinking about what Ma would say. About all this? She'd say I should have opened the door sooner, should have checked on them daily instead of just at night, should have fought harder for them from the beginning. Ethan's voice was rough. Your mother had a gift for seeing what people needed before they knew they needed it themselves. I'm just trying to learn from her example. You talk about her more now than you did before. Because I'm not drowning in grief anymore. Because those girls gave me permission to remember the good instead of just the loss. Ethan turned to his son. James, I can't undo what happened with your mother. Can't change the fact that I didn't get the doctor fast enough, that I missed the signs she was getting worse. I'll carry that guilt until the day I die. But I can't let it stop me from living, from building something good out of the wreckage. Is that what this is? Building something good? I think so. I hope so. James was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'm still angry at you. I know. But I'm starting to understand why you're doing this, and I think... He stopped, swallowed hard. I think Ma would be proud of you. For opening that door, for fighting for them. Ethan felt his throat close up. You think so? Yeah. She always said the measure of a man wasn't what he did when things were easy, but what he did when they were hard. This is hard. And you're doing it anyway. James looked at his father, and for the first time in 3 years, there was something other than anger in his eyes. I can't stay. I've got work in Denver, commitments, but I'll come back for the final hearing. I'll testify if you need me to. You do that? For those girls? Yeah. They deserve a shot at something better than what they had. James pushed off the rail. And maybe eventually we can figure out how to be father and son again. Not today, but someday. I'd like that. They stood in awkward silence, years of hurt still between them, but the first fragile bridge beginning to form. Finally, James stuck out his hand. Ethan took it, and they shook, formal, distant, but a start. James stayed for dinner.
Lena had made pot roast with carrots and potatoes, and the kitchen filled with warmth and the smell of home cooking. The conversation was stilted at first, but gradually began to flow. James told stories about the mines, about Denver, about the life he'd built in the 3 years away. Lena listened with wide eyes, asking questions that made James smile despite himself. After dinner, James helped with the dishes, something he'd never done as a boy. Ethan watched his son and Lena work side by side at the basin, talking quietly, and felt something shift in his chest, not healing exactly, but the beginning of it. James left the next morning, promising to write and to return for the final hearing. As he rode away, Lena came to stand beside Ethan. "He's nice," she said. "Sad, but nice." "Yeah, he is. Do you think he'll really come back?" "I think so. He gave his word." Lena nodded, watching until James disappeared over the rise. "It must be hard, being angry at someone you love."
"The hardest thing there is."
"I'm glad he came. I think it helped, both of you." She was right. Something had loosened in Ethan's chest, some knot of guilt and grief that had been strangling him for 3 years. James coming home, even briefly, even with anger still between them. It was progress. It was hope. The months that followed developed their own rhythm. Margaret's visits continued monthly, each one supervised by the increasingly unimpressed Mrs. Hodge. Margaret tried different approaches, sometimes conciliatory, sometimes aggressive, once even tearful, but Lena held firm. She was polite but distant, answering questions without volunteering information, making it clear that while she'd tolerate her aunt's presence, she'd never trust her again. After the third visit, Mrs. Hodge pulled Ethan aside. "Between you and me, Mrs. Hale is doing herself no favors. Every visit reinforces that child's desire to stay with you. If this goes back to court, my reports will reflect that." Winter came to Wyoming with a vengeance, turning the landscape white and the air sharp enough to cut. Ethan enrolled Lena in the small schoolhouse 3 miles from the ranch, and she threw herself into learning with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else. Her teacher, Miss Abernathy, reported that Lena was bright, curious, and protective of the younger children. "She's got a gift for helping the little ones," Miss Abernathy said during a parent meeting. "Patient and kind. You're raising a fine young woman, Mr. Cole." The words settled into Ethan's heart and took root. Christmas came, and Ethan found himself preparing for the holiday for the first time in years. Lena helped him cut a tree from the North Ridge, and they decorated it with strings of popcorn and dried apple slices. On Christmas morning, there were gifts, simple things, practical things, but chosen with care. A new dress for Lena, a rag doll for Mara, books and pencils, and a warm winter coat. Lena cried when she opened her gifts, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that someone had thought about what she might want and need, that she mattered enough for that kind of attention. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the dress to her chest. "Thank you so much." "You're welcome, kiddo." James sent a package from Denver, a carved wooden horse for Mara, and a journal with a leather cover for Lena. The note inside was brief but warm. "Keep writing your story. It deserves to be told." Lena traced the embossed cover with reverent fingers. "I'm going to write everything down, everything that's happened, so Mara will know when she's older." "That's a good idea." "And maybe," she hesitated, "maybe someday I'll write it for other kids too. Kids who think nobody will help them, so they'll know to keep knocking on doors, because eventually one will open." Winter gave way to early spring, and suddenly the final hearing was a month away, then 2 weeks, then days. Ethan found himself checking the calendar obsessively, as if counting down to either salvation or disaster, and not quite knowing which. The night before the hearing, he couldn't sleep. He found Lena on the porch in her nightgown, wrapped in a quilt, staring at the stars. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Too nervous. What if the judge changed his mind? What if he thinks 6 months isn't enough? Then we'll have more time to prove ourselves. But Lena, I need you to understand something. Whatever happens tomorrow, it doesn't change what we've built here. It doesn't change the fact that you're loved and wanted. But it changes whether I get to stay. Maybe. But even if the worst happens, and I don't think it will, I'm not giving up. I'll fight for you until there's no fight left to give." She leaned against him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. They sat in silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, both thinking about tomorrow and all it might bring. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cold. They dressed in their best clothes, Ethan in the suit he'd worn to Sarah's funeral, Lena in her Christmas dress, Mara in a tiny outfit Mrs. Chen had sewn especially for the occasion. The drive to town felt both too fast and too slow, reality and anticipation colliding in a way that made Ethan's hands shake on the reins. The courthouse steps were crowded again. More people this time. Word had spread that the final determination would be made today. Ethan saw friendly faces in the crowd. Mrs. Chen, Doc Reinhardt, Tom Brennan, Miss Abernathy, the pastor and his wife. All the people who'd become their community, their support, their proof that this makeshift family was real. And standing near the back, looking uncomfortable but present, was James. He'd come back, just like he'd promised. Pritchard met them at the door, his expression cautiously optimistic. Mrs. Hodges' reports were excellent. Margaret's lawyer tried to discredit them, but the facts speak for themselves. We've got a strong case. Strong enough? Ethan asked. As strong as we can make it. The rest is up to the judge. They filed into the same courtroom, took the same seats, but this time felt different. Final. Like standing on the edge of a cliff, not knowing if the ground ahead was solid or if one more step would mean falling. Judge Morrison entered and the bailiff called them to order. The judge surveyed the room with his usual grave expression, then began. We're here for the final determination in the matter of Lena Marie Hale and Mara Rose Hale. I've reviewed the supervisor's reports from the past 6 months, as well as additional testimony and documentation provided by both parties. He looked at Margaret, then at Ethan. I've also given considerable thought to what's in the best interest of these children, which is and always has been the paramount concern of this court. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. Mrs. Hale, you've attended each required visit and complied with the court's conditions. However, the supervisor's reports indicate that your interactions with your nieces have been marked by attempts at manipulation, guilt, and coercion rather than genuine care for their well-being. Your focus appears to be on asserting your rights rather than considering what these children actually need. Margaret's face flushed, but she remained silent. Mr. Cole, the reports indicate that both children have thrived under your care. Lena is excelling in school, has formed healthy friendships, and has demonstrated remarkable emotional growth. Mara is healthy, happy, and well cared for. The home you've provided is stable, nurturing, and supportive. The judge paused, removed his spectacles, and looked directly at Lena. Miss Hale, you're 10 years old now, old enough to understand the weight of this decision. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer honestly. Do you understand? Lena stood, her voice steady. Yes, Your Honor. Where do you want to live, with your aunt or with Mr. Cole? With Mr. Cole, with Ethan. Why? Lena took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and sure. Because he makes me feel safe. Because when I'm scared, he doesn't tell me I'm being silly. He sits with me until the scared goes away. Because he teaches me things and doesn't make me feel stupid when I don't understand. Because he lets me be a kid sometimes instead of always being responsible. Her voice wavered but didn't break. Because he opened his door when everyone else closed theirs. Because he's the first person who ever made me feel like I was worth keeping. The courtroom was utterly silent. And your sister? The judge asked gently. What do you think is best for Mara? She should be with me, and I should be with Ethan, because we're a family now, not by blood but by choice. And choice is stronger than blood. Judge Morrison nodded slowly, replaced his spectacles. Thank you, Miss Hale. You may be seated. Lena sat, and Ethan reached over to take her hand. It was trembling, but her grip was strong. Having considered all the evidence and testimony, the judge said, the court finds that the best interests of these children are clearly served by permanent placement with Mr. Ethan Cole. Therefore, I hereby grant Mr. Cole full legal guardianship of Lena Marie Hale and Mara Rose Hale, with all the rights and responsibilities thereof. Mrs. Hale's parental claim is terminated. Should Mr. Cole wish to pursue adoption proceedings at a later date, this court will look favorably upon such a petition. The gavel fell. And just like that, it was over. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and whispers. Margaret stood abruptly, her face twisted with fury, but her lawyer pulled her back down. Lena turned to Ethan with tears streaming down her face, and he pulled her into a tight embrace. We won, she whispered. We really won. We did. You're home. For good. Mara, sensing the emotion, started to cry, but they were happy tears joining the chorus of relief and joy that filled the small courtroom. Outside on the courthouse steps, their community surrounded them. Mrs. Chen wept openly, hugging both girls. Doc Reinhardt shook Ethan's hand with surprising force. Tom Brennan clapped him on the back hard enough to bruise. Miss Abernathy promised Lena she'd see her in school on Monday. And James stood off to the side, watching. When Ethan caught his eye, his son smiled. It was small, tentative, but real. Ethan made his way through the crowd to him. "You came back. Told you I would." James looked at Lena, who was surrounded by well-wishers. "She did good in there, real good. She's something special." "Yeah, I can see that." James hesitated, then said, "I'm thinking about coming home for a while, not permanently, but maybe for a few months. Help out around the ranch. Get to know my new sisters." He stumbled over the word, then committed to it. "If that's okay with you." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "More than okay. We'd love to have you." "Then I'll be back in 2 weeks, after I settle things in Denver." They shook hands again, and this time it felt less formal, more like the beginning of something being rebuilt from the ruins. The ride home was filled with chatter. Lena couldn't stop talking about what the judge said, about how scared she'd been, about what it meant to really and truly be home. Mara babbled along, not understanding but happy to be part of the celebration. When they reached the ranch, the gate stood open, and the house waited with its windows catching the afternoon sun. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop and just looked at it for a moment. This place that had been dead for so long. This place that was alive again. "We're home," Lena said, wonder in her voice. "Yeah, we are." They climbed down from the wagon, and as they walked toward the house, Lena stopped suddenly. "What is it?" Ethan asked. "I just realized. I've been here for 8 months, and I never asked. What should I call you? Mr. Cole feels too formal now. Ethan feels, I don't know, not quite right." Ethan crouched down to her level, meeting her eyes. "What do you want to call me?" Lena bit her lip, then said quietly, "Could I call you Pa? I know I'm not your daughter by blood, but you're my daughter in every way that matters." His voice was rough. "And I'd be honored if you called me Pa." "Really?" "Really." She threw her arms around his neck and he held her tight. This child who'd walked through fire. This child who'd taught him how to live again. "Come on," he said when they finally pulled apart. "Let's go inside. It's been a long day, and I think we've earned some of that pie, Mrs. Chen sent home with us." They went into the house together, Ethan, Lena, and Mara, and the door closed behind them on everything that had come before. The fear, and the grief, and the loneliness. The court battles, and the uncertainty. All of it fading into the past, making room for what came next. That evening, they sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Mara slept in Ethan's lap, thumb in her mouth. Lena leaned against his shoulder, her journal open on her knees, writing down the day's events in careful script. "Pa?" she said without looking up. "Yeah?" "Thank you for everything." "You already thanked me. About 100 times." "I know, but I'll probably say it 100 more." She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the fading light. "You saved us. And I don't just mean from dying on the road. You saved us from thinking nobody cared. From thinking we didn't matter. You saved me too. Gave me a reason to keep going when I'd given up on reasons. Then I guess we saved each other." "I guess we did." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. The chickens settled in for the night. Ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening on an ordinary ranch. But there was nothing ordinary about what they'd built. About 3 people who'd found each other across the vast emptiness of grief and loss and become something new, something whole. A family. Not by blood, but by choice. And choice, as Lena had said, was stronger than blood. Weeks turned into months, and spring bloomed across Wyoming with a violence of color and life. The ranch thrived under Ethan's renewed attention. James came home for 2 months, and while things between father and son were still careful, still tender with old wounds, they were healing. Slowly. In the way that real healing happens, not all at once, but in small moments of grace. Lena flourished. She grew taller, filled out, lost the haunted look that had shadowed her eyes. She made friends at school, brought them home to meet her family, laughed with the ease of someone who'd finally learned that joy didn't have to be earned. Mara took her first steps on a Sunday morning in June, lurching from the sofa to Ethan's outstretched hands with a determined expression that reminded him so much of her sister. When she made it across and he scooped her up, Lena cheered so loud the chickens scattered in alarm. In August, Ethan filed the adoption papers. The judge approved them without ceremony, and Lena Marie Cole and Mara Rose Cole became official in the eyes of the law. That night, Lena hung a sign above her bed that she'd painted herself. It was simple, just 4 words in careful lettering. "This is my home." And it was. Years later, when Mara was old enough to understand, Lena told her the story. About the long walk through the heat. About the doors that closed and the one that opened. About a man who'd lost everything and found it again in 2 children who needed him as much as he needed them. Mara listened with wide eyes, then asked the question children always ask, "And they lived happily ever after?" Lena smiled, the same smile that had transformed her face in Judge Morrison's courtroom all those years ago. Not happily ever after, just happily, which is better because it's real. And in the house where 3 people had learned what it meant to be a family, where laughter had replaced silence and hope had conquered grief, the story continued. Not with an ending, but with all the beautiful, ordinary, miraculous moments that make up a life lived in love. The gate stood open. The door was never locked. And home, finally, meant what it was supposed to mean. A place where you belonged. A place where you were chosen. A place where, no matter how far you wandered or how lost you became, you could always find your way back. Because someone was waiting. Someone who'd opened a door when everyone else had closed theirs. Someone who'd turned temporary into permanent and strangers into family. And that, Lena thought, as she closed her journal and climbed into bed in the room that had been hers for 5 years now, was the only ending worth having. Not perfect, just true.